You might be turning to Galatians chapter 5. We had got down to about verse 7. We've been taking a good bit of time on purpose talking about the problem that the Galatians had in going back and embracing certain tenets from the Old Testament as if they were God's law for them. And we tried to point out that men today do the same thing in their argumentation when they try to support self-defense and other issues. And the first thing they do is run back and tell us how David and them behaved and how Nehemiah behaved and others. and that's just interesting because, again, irregardless of what they did back then, that's just simply not our law, and we're not under it. And you don't get to go back there and grab David's sword. You have to grab his wives. See, you can grab his sword. Can I grab his wives? See the point? If you can go get his sword, can I get his wives? And if not, why not? Therein lies the problem with fooling around back there, trying to justify behaviors. See, because if you can go grab one, I'm going to go show you one I guarantee you won't go grab. And see, and we've tried to spend time, because I'd love for us, I want to encourage all of us to adjust our language as we're talking about the old covenant, to adjust our approach to it. See, to make that differentiation between us learning like New Testament inspired men showed us how to use it like that. See, and that way God's people is benefited on multiple levels, as we pointed out last week. And namely, we stay clinging to our head, Jesus Christ. And we appreciate his new covenant and its freedom and liberties that it provides for us and affords us. See, that you take on a burden you cannot bear because better men than us couldn't bear it. When you go back grabbing tenets back there as our justification for our lives today. See, and if Paul and Peter and James and them couldn't handle it, and Josiah and men like that couldn't handle it, can you handle it? You know, you can bear up under it. You can go and walk without sin, keeping that old covenant day after day. Because that's the consequence, isn't it? That to go grab circumcision, Paul said, not only have you fallen from grace, but you are a debtor to keep the whole law. So don't try it because it indebts you. That's what that law said. See, it didn't require a person to go pick and choose. See, that's one of its curses. That's one of the freedoms that we have in Christ, is that we're relieved of that grind, of daily grind. Took time and went back and read about the unclean person under the Old Testament. You should read it. I mean, you probably read it, I know, but I mean, go reread it and just see what it took if you touched a dead body or walked over a grave accidentally or got unclean in some way, how you'd get yourself unclean. That the red heifer, the ashes, and mixing it with water, and a clean person had to sprinkle you with it, and somebody died in your house, they had to sprinkle the house, sprinkle everything was touched in there. Anybody that was in there, and then anybody that came in to get the body, they all had to be sprinkled, but they was unclean 7 days. And all it took, that daily grind of that law. So let us appreciate, and as we show Bible authority, let's learn that anything right or wrong, you name it, basketball, is it right? Going to the movies, is it right? 2 wives, is it right? God's new covenant addresses it. That we've been given all things that we need under this new covenant to fully furnish the man of God unto every good work. Absolutely any sin, dancing. You don't have to go back there fooling around to show it's wrong. Lot said in the Old Covenant about drinking. If it's wrong, read the New Testament passages on it. You'll see whether it's right or wrong. See? And that's not, again, we've spent a lot of time explaining how to use it. No problem going back there showing things. Use it like the New Testament inspired men taught us how to use it. See? But any action that's right or wrong for you and I today, the New Testament addresses it. And we need to learn that. See? That you don't have to go back there and point out David's problems to know that everything David did, a Christian couldn't do. Looking at a woman and lusting after her. That's wrong. Jesus went further than adultery, didn't he? Whosoever looketh upon a woman, he said. Now David's problem at coveting, that's a sin of the heart. But Jesus says, you've heard it been said, don't commit adultery. But I say to you, see, not only is adultery wrong, he says, but whosoever looketh upon her. See, that standard is much higher, isn't it? That moral law is higher than what David and them dealt with. You've heard it been said by Moses, see. But here's what I say to you, and that's what that appreciation for what Jesus Christ and those 12 men that he inspired, that sit on 12 thrones judging us today, those 12 men, the words that they were given, that they penned, wrote down, sent men out to take to us. Let us embrace those words. That better covenant. We pointed out last week how much better circumcision that we have is, because it's an operation by God, not a daddy or a mama cutting the piece of skin off of a little boy. What about the operation, the circumcision of the heart that we pointed out last week? What about it? How special is that? The operation of God upon one's mind and heart to cut away sin from his life. That one thing that needs removed. And he sent, didn't he? A great price was paid to cut that sin away. Let us embrace that covenant. And again, we pointed out 2 Sundays, 3, that doesn't in any way undermine the Old Testament on any level. To preach this loudly doesn't undermine this other, you see, at all. Absolutely not. What he tells them in verse 7 and 8 is that you started off good and you've been hindered. We talked a little bit about this hindering. Sometimes when a hindering happens, it's the fault of the people themselves. They do all the clamoring for the false teaching. Yeah, you got the problem with the guy who stands up like me and tell them something they shouldn't hear, but that isn't how it comes down all the time. Sometimes it comes down like this. Timothy, I want you to preach the word. I want you to be ready in season and out of season. I need you to rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. You teach what you ought to teach. And he says, because here's what happens. Verse 3, 2 Timothy 4, for the time will come when they, you and I, will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, God's people start clamoring. They start wanting, see, they get tired of the strictness. They get tired of being told how to dress. Their own desires. They want their kids to play ball. They want to miss it sometimes, and they don't want to hear about it from the pulpit. They start clamoring. See, their own desires, their lust, what they like. And then he says, according to their own desires, because they have itching ears. I need somebody to talk to me. Here, scratch me if you don't mind. See, let's find us a good man. See, here. And then it says, because they have itching ears, they, the members, heap up for themselves. See, they get what they want. It's for us. He's a good man. I like him. See, what you teach, brother, on divorce. Now, how you feel about dress and stuff like that? Last fellow we had in here, he's a little, he'd like to run everybody off. You couldn't hardly go swimming or nothing around him. They start clamoring. And they heap up for themselves teachers, and they'll turn their ears away from the truth. They don't want it. And be turned aside to fables. Now, these men that's in Galatia, we don't exactly know just 100% which persuasion they were, but they dirty, these men. They troublemakers. See, this group. You got some innocent folks that the apostles was trying to grow and mature into learning that we don't have to circumcise our children. See, they had Paul accommodate them people. See, to show them that he wasn't against the law and all that. And Paul went and submitted to an oath, took an oath, him and some guys, and he was in the temple purified, nearly done with it when the troublemakers from Asia show up. And Paul gets put in jail, and his life gets turned upside down for several years, it seems, because of that little incident, him accommodating God's people. You see. But so you see, it ain't always the teacher. You say, here, you see the culprit here, that the people start hunting out a teacher. See, that will tell them what they want to hear. That, people like, they say, you stepped on my toes. When I hear, they're like, boy, you got after us this morning, Well, I can tell you what, you teach this word just right, you out the door is where you about headed to. There ain't gonna be no you stepped on our toes. See, because God's people in a lot of places have become dissatisfied, hadn't they, with just good old strict teaching on morality, on dress, on attendance, on all those things. Now, incidentally, we don't have that problem here at this juncture. We hope, we've had good teaching, still got excellent teaching, still got men watching. But they probably had it too, is the truth about it. You see, all the 7 churches of Asia, all of these issues these churches have, you just got to picture elders sitting up in there too, because they just like these people here. That's who he's talking about when he says they'll teach up itching. You know, he's talking about the congregation. I mean, if elders was on the ball, right, there wouldn't be no heaping up. You see. So these heapers uppers is men. All the church gets dissatisfied, and I don't mean every single member, but you'll get that group that leads and directs, and they'll lead God's people off. And there's the warning for every person in the congregation, elders, deacons, everybody included. The fully organized group has to be careful here. But here, the troublemakers seem to be the teachers, don't it? Can't you tell that they the problem? Paul says, now you ran well. Who hindered you? Like who got it? Who got in your way? See, who put the roadblock out there on y'all? Got y'all jumbled up in this Old Testament stuff. See. And we know that because if you read on, you know, he says, now I got confidence in you, but he who troubles you, verse 10 says, shall bear his own judgment. See. And then verse 12, I wish that those who trouble you would cut themselves off. See, here is some look like they didn't come in. Paul said, really, it looks like that these had been brought in. He certainly applied it to himself when they tried to get him and Titus, them to comply with all of this baloney. And he said, absolutely not. See? So they get brought in by certain ones, you know, the way it wording seemed like on Paul's and them case that here was some that had embraced this stuff, and they got men to come in, see if they couldn't get Paul and them straightened out. See, because Paul said they tried to bring, who'd be fooling around with the Apostle Paul? But Paul said they tried to bring us into bondage. We read that last week. Boy, you'd have to be pretty bold to be fooling around with Paul, wouldn't you? You know, pretty out of your mind is what you'd have to be. But anyway, they tried it. Paul them didn't buy it for a second. He said, not even for an hour. Well, we're going to let them tell Titus he needed to be baptized. Circumcised. I think I was saying baptized last week. Pretty sure I was. Sorry about that. I'm almost certain I was because I can't quit saying it. I said it at the house. I'm saying it here. So sorry about that. Any questions or comments before we move on from this section? Because this is kind of our departure from this about 3 weeks now of hammering hard on encouraging us not to go back fooling around with this Old Testament for any of our justifications, because you don't need it. I can't think of one sin that you can't, you name it, and we could just test it here. Just something. Is it okay to go to the movies? Can you marry a non-Christian? Can you, like any subject, you don't have to go back there and show, oh, God, God told them don't intermarry. These people here will lead you off track. That's good to go look at it. But the New Testament teaches is wrong. That's wrong. The New Testament teaches that is wrong. See, clearly. That's why it's wrong, is because the Holy Spirit, after he was sent, when the church came, when the kingdom came to guide God's people into all truth, he said it was wrong. See, that's why it's wrong. Yes, And again, that doesn't mean you can't go back there and show, look at how when they married, like 2 Corinthians 6 talks about, you go back here and you get caught up, see, with people of the world. See, get unequally yoked and all. What can happen to you? But that's a New Testament man raising them questions. See, he said, "Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." See, I mean, you don't have to go back here and see any unequal yoking. Whether he got that from that something, yoking an animal, or whether he didn't. I know what he said is that you and I don't need to be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. See, I know he told women that were unmarried, that married a man that was a non-Christian, that she could convert him. There's no divorce there. She could convert him by just living a quiet, good life in front of him. That she could win him over that way. See, that New Testament that's something. It addresses all kind of stuff. That becomes an issue in people's lives. I'm in this situation now. What do I do? And he says, "Oh, just a good, quiet life." The Spirit said can really influence him. You could win him that way. Well, you see, a lady can go about her business and have confidence that maybe one day she could influence him for good and help him. See, you don't have to go back. You don't need nothing back there to get that figured out at all. See, listen to the Spirit and buy into what he says. And have faith in that. And it's worked over and over. There's people here that's converted their mates. So by just a good, quiet life and all. Dave, did I see your hand?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Comparing just the teaching of the Old Testament and the New Testament as far as giving goes, Old Testament, 10%, and I get that, but I've seen comparisons made, and I've done it too over the years. Well, they give this under the Old Testament, but we should do it, should be at least that good, but we're not required to do that, given we've been prospered. So that's, yeah, I guess that's all I'm going to say. That's something out there that we have to think about.
Yeah, it's a whole nother system of giving.
Yeah.
Don't nobody want to go start talking about the giving them Jews did. I wouldn't invite anybody to start that. Just go read a little bit and you'll get up and back there and come up here to this beautiful lay-by store as God has prospered you. It's where you'll land. Because that giving, this right here, first to this, best to that right here, bring this one, that one right here, cut this one up, let the blood drip, all that. Man, I like what we got. I'm going to run with this one, this new covenant that we have. And it's beautiful, giving and the type giving that we do and all. And I'm there. So this next statement he makes, I'd like for us to talk about together. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on it, but he explains to them that if they embraced just a little of what these troublemakers were teaching, that it could end up infecting everybody. He said that by stating what he had said to the Corinthians. At verse 9, he says, "Now, don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump?" Before I comment on that, I talked a good bit about it just in passing and alluding to this. At verse 8, Paul just states clearly, y'all didn't get this from God. Okay. You know, that this influence that you've embraced, it didn't come from God. And that's enough to leave it alone right there, isn't it? See, when you read that, when you got this letter and Paul says, now you didn't get this from God, oh, that should do it. That ought to settle it. This didn't come from God. Now, he took great pains to explain what came from God, the purity of the gospel that he had taught them. He said, I didn't get it. He said, it's not from man. It did not come from man, see. He said it came by the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's what he said in that first chapter. This gospel y'all got, this gospel I've been preaching, it came directly from Jesus Christ himself. And then see here he tells them, y'all didn't get this from God. And he could be simply meaning, I didn't teach you this. But this little leaven leavens the whole lump is a problem that we need to talk about together because it's a big problem. I want to share with you a thought, a belief of mine, and I'd like for y'all to test it and argue against it if you disagree with it. Here's what I think is happening in the church today, is that Christians will get caught up in a sin and they're unrepentant. And when efforts are made to try to restore them, they're unrepentant. And instead of God's people, and I'm talking elders and God's people, this isn't anything about our elders or anybody. I'm really talking about, I've seen this everywhere that I've been. Everywhere that I've ever worshiped, I've seen what I'm about to say. And so, instead of God's people making a unified decision to withdraw from them, they're unrepentant. They've told us no 20 times. Now, I don't know how much louder a person can tell you no, but they've told us 20 times. And what I mean by that is maybe 20 people have reached out to them, see, got the same kind of reaction. Maybe the elders have talked to them and they got no. I'm not straightening out. And then here's what happens. Now, this verse here says, be careful, because if you don't discipline that, if you embrace that, if you allow that to linger, it'll end up affecting everybody. And here's what ends up happening. Folks at the church, they'll start eating with that person. Say, that's my, but they would, you know, they had friends at that church. See, now they done left the faith, but folks will start eating with them and kind of over socializing with them. You know, they ain't cut them off or anything like that. See, and you kind of start violating your conscience, or at least that's how it happens to me, because you get caught in all these should I be eating with them. Say, should I be eating with them? Them kind of things. And what ends up happening, see, is I want to read you what ends up happening. In 1 Corinthians 5, here's what Paul says. Now, it's been reported that you got a fornicator there. Verse 2 says, but you puffed up, you ain't cried one bit. Now there's the problem. See here, I want you to watch. Here's the problem, is the lack of tears. See, for the church, for this person. And it happens with each member. See, because if there was a unified mourning, you'd see folks get withdrawn from. Watch what he says here. You are puffed up, verse 2, 1 Corinthians 5, and have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. Now you tell me, what is he not saying right there? You should have been crying so that you could withdraw from that person. But Joe, that's what verse 2 says. That if everybody's got the right attitude, now if one or two cry, and there's always one or two crying, 5 or 6, or there's always folks crying. But the problem is that it's not enough people with this attitude and understanding that we better deal with this. Now, we may have one person now. Tomorrow, it may be 5. See? And if you don't deal with this one, how you gonna deal with that one? See, that you end up with problems the longer this sin prevails. And then you have people at home going, I wonder why come they didn't get her, you know why they didn't? They buddies with, you see, they start that, and then this one over here, you know what happens right here? That starts. See, now that's what has happened. Who's the problem? Isn't it the left? Isn't it the sinner? But see what it's done. See how it can hurt everybody. But what happens? Watch what Paul says though. Verse 6, he says, "Now your glorying is not good. Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump?" See, up here he done told him, now see, you should have done already put this person away. Now then he commands them to, but then he comes back, he says, but don't you know though how this works? That it can hurt everybody? The problems associated with what this, see, the fornicator is the problem. But then, see, it ends up, see, affecting everybody. People's attitude toward that person starts getting affected. See, that's what starts happening. And folks start, life sets in, everybody's busy, and nobody calls the person. That's really what happens. That's what I've always experienced, is that everybody's too busy to really reach out and deal with that person. And I don't mean, again, now, it's always a group of God's people that's always on the ball. You should get to know them. Because they're going to go see, they're going to call, they're going to write letters, they're going to reach out. You got that element. But most of God's people too busy to care about folks caught up in sin. I mean, they love them and stuff. But this morning, if they had this that they ended up getting, when he writes the second time, he says, oh, I see what your repentance produced in you. Now you can tell you care about that person. See? So that's really what I think ends up happening. And he says, but I want you to look at about this leaven and this whole lump. Verse 7, he says, therefore purge out the old leaven. He's just talking about that person and your bad attitudes. You got to get your nasty attitudes out of the way too. That you may be a new lump. That's what never gets emphasized in the withdrawal discussion, is the new lump. That all the talk is on the fornicator, or on the idolater, or on the covetous person. We're waiting on them. We're waiting on them. We're waiting on them. We're waiting on them. And with that unbeknownst, done overlook the fact of this urgency of how leaven works. And the evil, and again, now the culprit ain't, the culprit is the fornicator, the leaven. What we have to make sure of is that we're in a unified attitude towards sin. That's what has to be there. A unified attitude towards sin. See? And so the lump, what did he write here to Galatians at verse 9? Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? See, emphasis on the lump. Yeah, a little of it will get everybody. And we know he's talking about, now there's a sense in which one sin in your life, little leaven, will leaven you. You will go from bad to worse. That's what Reuben pointed out, what happened to David. You know, they can go from a little looking at a lady to murder and everything else. See? Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? But here, he's talking about the congregation, though, didn't he? He says, you purge out the old leaven that you may be a new lump. See what he's talking about here? You purge out the old leaven that you were a lump. As a congregation, we're a lump. Now, any pushback, disagreement, comments, thoughts along those lines? That's what I think happens a lot of times. And keep in mind, now you always got, he won't want me to do it, but I'm going to brag on Brother Hall. Here's what I know about him since he's hit the ground here. I think he does his part in these areas. I've seen him with all of our children, you know, trying to help our children since he hit the ground here. I know he goes, sees, and, you know, tries to do his part in these areas. That's not to knock anybody else. I'm really singling out. What I'm trying to get at here is this isn't anything about our elders or anything along those lines. This is a message for you and I. We the lump. Let's not, like I said, they have to go see and restore. Galatians 6 talks to them just like it talks to us. Brethren, if any man be overtaken in a fault, that's in our chapter, incidentally, in our book. If any man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one. It ain't all on them. See, it ain't always on them. Yes.
First, I just want to say amen. And then second, it also, as someone who quote unquote grew up in the church, it's extremely confusing for a child who is around people, God's people, who are not doing what you just said. And so here I am, I'm almost 30 years old, and I'm still trying to figure out the truth on withdrawal because I didn't see it the way it was supposed to be done. You know, I don't want to say picking and choosing, but you know, we're going to emphasize hard on withdrawing from this person, but we're not going to emphasize hard on this because this is a different sin. And now I do know Scripture teaches, you know, we don't withdraw over the smallest thing. You know, we work together to try to be unified in faith, but at the same time, not seeing withdrawal done properly, not getting the bad leaven out, will then therefore cause a child to not understand withdrawal.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's right, among other things. We're going to close. Jeremy, I'm sorry I didn't get you. I saw your hand fly up. And we'll pick this back up. Y'all be thinking about this and any thoughts along what I just said. Love to hear from you. And we don't have to, you know, this can be a good, loving talk among ourselves to help us.